So to start with in this part, I'm going to quickly just run over how we've set up our scene. Now, important to note here that we don't really have anything spectacular going on, even though the results do look nice. The important thing is that we really want to see our materials kind of in their raw state, how they would be without any excessive post-processing or lighting. So with it, I'm just going to run really quickly down how we kind of set this up. So in terms of our meshes, as we covered in the previous one, we've got this test cube that we've imported, and I've simply just set it up where it's kind of just this little L shape. So the next thing that I've done is I've actually gone in and I've added this post-processing volume. Now I've called it neutralized, and I'll just keep these settings up, but for the most part, this is about it. It's just setting the exposure so our min brightness and our max brightness stay clamped. I'll put a link in the description as well for one of the other videos that I covered about creating a neutral scene, which helps to remove any of the extra bits in the post-processing volume that you don't need. So for this one, this is all that I've changed in here, and that's simply just to make sure that when I look in the dark spots, it doesn't get overexposed, and when we have light, bright points, it doesn't try to underexpose. So that just levels that out. Next thing that I've done is I've added a directional light. I'll rotate it here so you can see, and that's simply just providing us some context shadow, just to give us something where we can see light coming in. So we've got brighter spots and then kind of these little darker spots, and nothing spectacular here, just a white color. We used the temperature. I've used about 9,000 Kelvin is what I've used, just to kind of give a simulated, whether it's like a, I don't know, like you're in a subway or something, but just something that's a little bit cooler light. So then we'll offset it with some of the warmer light here. Simply set to movable. I should note too that I believe most of these are either set to stationary, our point lights or our direction light are set to movable or stationary, and the primary reason for that is this is just purely a, kind of a look dev scene. This is not for runtime performance, so I'm not overly concerned with having to bake lighting. I just want to see it in real time. Next thing that I've done is I've gone in and added a skylight, and all I've really done here is just kind of bumped up our cube map resolution as well as the intensity. And what I've done here, and I'll pop this up so you can see, I've simply just added this HDRI. There's nothing spectacular about this HDRI other than the fact that I like the colors that were in here. They were a little bit warmer. Again, with our direction light being that it's a cooler light at that 9,000 Kelvin, I wanted something a little bit warmer to kind of fill this in and give a little bit of atmosphere and mood. But when you're setting up your scene, it doesn't really matter. You can use whatever HDRI you want. So that's been set up. It's affect world, cast shadows, and we have it set to stationary. So that kind of covers our general environment. And then for each of the, I've got a few of the dioramas in here that we'll show, but for each of these little kind of setups, I've created just a box reflection and kind of set it down a little bit in this area. I've upped the transition distance a little bit and scaled it just to make sure that it contains the volume in here. That's going to be very important because as we go through here and we have these reflection points, as we have these reflection points, it's going to be important that we actually see how that's interacting. So box reflection, and then the last bits are just adding some just different point lights. These are simply just to add a little bit of fill for me to be able to see. For example, if I were to take all these and just hide them, you can see that this gets rather boring and rather flat, and it's hard to really tell where we've got some of our less rough, kind of more specular areas. So simply gone in and just added these point lights, and I'll highlight them for you so you can see. Relatively small attenuation radius. We do want to add a little bit of source radius. That's what's going to get us this spot. So for example, it takes down to 0. You can see that it's just a point. We'll take this back up, about 45. Again, nothing spectacular here. This is purely just a setup so I can kind of visualize and see how this material is interacting in different environments, shadows, highlights, indirect lighting, direct lighting. So those have just gone around. And then the only other bits here are kind of these fluorescent tubes that I've added. So this mesh itself has a emissive material on it. Nothing fancy about this material other than the fact that it's, just kind of illuminating a little bit. And then I just put a point light just offset just a little bit down below it so we get those kind of reflections here. And really the critical things to note that I've changed on this light versus, say, for example, this light, is the fact that I've actually set this source radius. So that's kind of mimicking the tube of the light, and then I've also set the source length, and that's what elongates it to match with the tube light itself. So one up here, and I simply just duplicated it, put this guy down on the floor, and that's it. And that's really the base setup for our diorama, which will help us visualize. So, okay, so the next part we're going to move on to is actually creating the base framework for our master material. So we'll go ahead and jump over and start that. All right, so in this section, I've actually set some of these materials up, which we'll get to a little bit later, but I want to go over the basics of creating this base material that you're going to need. Now, I'm going to put a link in the description as well to one of the other videos that I posted about creating master materials, in particular covering how to create these really rich and robust and very powerful materials where you can do things like hue saturation, desaturation, your base color changes, some min-max on roughness, where you can go really, really deep on that one. But for the purposes of this video, we're actually just going to go very, very simple. So you can take this, use this base knowledge, even the knowledge from some of those other videos, and then you can build this master material even further, but we'll just keep it simple for now. So to start, I'm just going to right click, we're going to create a new material, and then we're going to call this our example type blend. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and open this guy up, and I'll bring him over. All right, so to start with, the first thing that we're going to need, obviously, is our two base materials. So I'm going to go over to our textures, and I'm going to go ahead and just grab everything that's in here, and then we will drag drop in here, and then we'll kind of we'll get started. Actually, I don't have to do that. Let's go ahead and just grab our base one, which is going to be this broken. Okay, so that's our occlusion roughness, our normal, and our height map. So we'll keep our height map a little bit separate. Do these. We'll go ahead and comment, and we'll call this our mat 1. And then we'll come down, and we'll drag the same thing in here. In this case, I'm not going to need this other height map, which will be explained a little bit later, but I'm just going to go ahead and grab these guys. We'll go ahead and organize them a little bit. We'll name this mat 2. Okay, there we go. So we have our two height maps, and we have, we have our two base materials that we need, and our height map to blend. Okay, so one thing that we do want to do with this one is, because these are fully repeatable textures, that we do want to control their UVs and expose. So I will note that what we're doing on this one, even though I've got these materials, that we're essentially going to turn this into a small master material that we can reuse. Again, I'm a huge proponent of master materials. In this situation, might as well do the work once and be able to reuse it over and over again for various materials. So what we're going to want to do here is actually set up some UV. So I'm just going to copy and paste a setup, and I'll explain what's happening here. So really the core of what we want to do is the ability to change the tiling of this material on the fly, right? So we can scale it down, scale it up as need be. So the real critical part here is this texture coordinates into a multiply. And then what we want to multiply is a 2 vector. So your U direction and your V direction. So with that, all we're going to do is just going to create this text coordinate. So you can right click and do text. We'll do text coordinate, plug it into a multiply. I'm going to right click, or you can just hold down the 2 button and left click, and that will get you a 2 vector. We'll right click, convert to parameter. So you can see it changes here, and we'll name this M1 UV tiling. And then of course we put this in a group called mat1 base. I'll come back to this, just bear with me here, just real quick overview. And then we're simply going to do a mask RGB. This is a quirk I found, that if you try to plug this directly into your multiply and then plug it into your texture coordinates, it's actually going to throw an error for you saying that it's trying to pass a 3 vector into a 2 vector. So simply just throw a mask on there, so we're just masking out and having our 1 and 2 channels, and that's it, and texture coordinate goes in. And finally, what we've done here is we've added this UV offset. So what this is going to allow us to do is to be able to, when we tile this material, we can then shift it up, left, or right on the actual mesh itself. This comes in handy, especially if you need to kind of line it up a little bit or tweak it. So we're going to put that in there. That's simply just the same thing as we had here. A 2 vector, we've right clicked, converted it to parameter, and called it UV offset. We've masked it, and then we simply add it. So there's nothing spectacularly fancy here. Just go ahead and copy this setup, and this will get you what you need. And you can see over here, if you don't see this window, go up to Window, and it is Parameter Defaults, and it'll probably pop up down here in the lower left. And if you pull it off, this is a preview of how those material instances will look. So there we have our UV offset and our UV tiling. All right, so now that our UV tiling is set up, all we need to do is just plug it into our UVs. And that's it. So this will get us our tiling. And set this up. And then if you want to see what's happening here, so I'm going to go and right click on this, and I'm going to say Start Preview Node. So it's going to show up here for me. Now this is using the default parameters, but you can see if I scale this up, so I'll go 2 and 2, enter UV tiling. You can see we have a lot more tiling. Let's crank it up. We'll go 10 and 10, and there you go. Now you can see. So this is what this UV tiling is controlling, is that amount of repetition. And then finally this one, this may be a little difficult to see, but if I bump it off by 0.5, you can see it's actually shifted everything up. So that'll be our U direction, and then of course G will be from left to right. If I take this to 0.5, you can see it's actually shifted it again. So those are really our controls, and again, these will be exposed on our material instances, so then we can go in and we can change these individually. So, okay, and then finally the last bit is, because we're using the same UV tiling, it's important that we also plug it into our height map. So there we go. Okay, so that sets up our UVs. Now, the next thing that we're going to want to do is, if we fast forward a little bit to how this is going to be set up, we're going to be blending these together with a height blend parameter. And something that I like to do for a little bit of cleanliness is we'll actually pump these into a make material attribute. So if I do make material attributes, we'll have this, and then we'll also need a break material attributes. So this just makes it a little bit easy. You guys can use this kind of trick if you want. Actually, let's maximize this so we can see. So with this, I just simply need to plug in what I have here. So my base color. And if you remember from our combined layered, we've got our occlusion in our red. So this will come out to our ambient occlusion, our roughness, and then our metallic. And then we'll need to plug in our normal, and that completes that setup. So let's go ahead and grab these two guys, and we'll paste these down here and do the exact same process for our second material. We'll go occlusion, occlusion, roughness, and our metallic. And we'll plug our normal in. All right, there we go. Okay, so that kind of completes our setup, right? So we've got our two material variations, material 1 and material 2 in our height map. So this is where it gets a lot of fun. So this is actually the blending process that we'll go through to be able to combine these together. So to do that, I'm going to right click and I'm going to type in height blurb. That's going to pull up this guy. And let's just explain a little bit what's happening here. So in your A channel and your B channel, those are going to be your two base materials. So A channel is going to be your base, B is going to be your second. Transition phase. Transition phase is going to be what controls the masking. And in this case, we're actually going to do vertex coloring. Your height texture will be the height texture that we have in there. And then the last bit is this contrast. And what contrast does is allows you to multiply this your height texture to give it more or less contrast, so you can see in the blending it'll make it sharper or less sharper in the blend transitions. We'll show that as we go through. So to do that, the first process that we'll need to do is combine these. Now something to take note of, that you cannot just plug in these material attributes. So we're actually going to have to do it for each one of these. Now we could have come directly off of these plugins. I prefer to do this make material and break material attributes just to keep things a little bit cleaner in our graph. So to do that, we'll step through the first process, and then I'll fast forward after this one to show you. But what we need to do is we essentially need to blend with this height blurb each of our bases. So to do that, this one, and I'll just make a comment, I'll just say base color height blend. So with this, I'm going to plug the base color of our first in, and then the base color of our second. And you'll want to remember this order, because if you start switching these, you might get some funky things. So we'll just always assume that our A is our mat 1 and our B is our mat 2. Then we'll come off of our height map and we'll do it into our height texture. Now for our transition phase, I'm going to right click and I'm going to type in Vertex. I'm going to get Vertex color. Okay, and then I'm going to plug the red channel into our transition phase. As you'll see a little bit later, we're actually going to leverage 3 of these channels. So red will be our blend between our base material and our second material. And then as we go into creating more of the complex setup, we'll use the green channel and the blue channel for our material variations, our material 1 variation and our material 2 variation. Okay, and then the last bit that we need to do is I'm going to hold down the 1 key, left click, create a 1 vector, right click, convert to parameter, and I'm going to call this height blend contrast. And we'll type right. There we go. Okay, and then we'll plug this into our contrast. And I'm going ahead and just comment these guys, just so you know what's happening here. And that is our height blend. Okay, and then a height blend contrast, you'll want to keep default value at 0. That is the base, so it will simply just take this height map as it is, no additional changes. So that is the basic setup. So what I'm going to fast forward here is I'm essentially just going to duplicate this whole setup, but for my additional channels. So we know we need metallic, our roughness, our normal, and our ambient occlusion. So we'll create those extras, and then we'll come right back. All right, so I've gone ahead and just duplicated this exact same setup we had in our base color. Now for our metallic, our roughness, normal, and our height blend. So you can see a little bit of a spaghetti mess here, but if I highlight over, you'll see that the height map plugs into the height texture for all of these. Same thing, our red channel goes for our transition phase, and our height blend contrast goes into the contrast of all those. So again, just a rinse and repeat of this exact same one for all of our channels. All right. So the last process that we need to do is we actually need to hook these guys up to make sure that it works. So this next step is just simply getting our output. So with this one, I'm going to select our output. And what I need to do is I need to change this. Instead of having all the individual material attributes, I'm actually just going to break those out. So we'll go ahead and check this use material attributes, which gives us an output. And then we'll right click as well, and we'll say make material attributes. And then we'll plug this guy in. And then simply all we need to do is just our result output is plug these guys in. So we'll go our base, our metallic, our roughness, our normal, and then finally our ambient occlusion. And there we go. And we can see our material in the preview. So let's go ahead and save this. And then finally, we can keep this here. Actually, I'll change this real fast because we've got this parameter here that just says none. So I'm going to create a new group. I'm just going to call this height blend. Okay. Actually, you know what? Let's do this real quick. So since we're already putting some of these parameters in, what we need to do is actually convert these guys. So I'm going to right click, convert to parameter, convert those guys, and then we'll also do that for these. Convert to parameter. You'll see these pop up. And then we'll name this one M1 BC. We'll name this one M1 ORM. And then finally this one M1 normal. Okay, and we'll take all these guys and we'll create a new group called M1 inputs. So we can see over here, now we've got those input channel maps that we can change with each of our material instances for future ones. So I'll go through real quick and just change these guys to match. So where we have M1 BC, we'll change this one to M2 BC. And name this one M2 ORM. This one will do M2 normal. Let's go ahead and type M2 normal. And then we'll select all of these guys. And then what we can do is just change one M1 inputs, and we'll change the name to M2 inputs. There we go. So this is what our material instances will look like. We'll have a parameter where we can drag and drop whatever materials that whatever textures that we want in there, which is super handy. So we set this up once and we reuse it. So we'll go ahead and save it. And then let's go ahead and close this window. Go back to our materials where we created this master, which is this example height blend. And to use this one, I'll simply right click, create material instance, and we'll just keep that example height blend instance and we'll apply it on top of here. And that is it. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to open this master up and tweak this. This guy's done, so we'll leave him as is. We want to open our instance, which will then get us this guy. So let me just kind of move this off screen and we can see what's happening here. Again, there's a video I'll link in the description for creating master materials and going much deeper than this one. But the cool thing is here we can now go into this UV tiling and set this. Let's say I can go 4 and 4, and now I have my tiles repeating. So actually let's take it back to 2, just so it's a little bit easier to see. And then of course we can check these guys, and at any point we can go in and just drag a new material, and there it is. So I'll reset that, give us our base. And that is it. So that is the basics of our material setup. So in the next section, let's go ahead and move on to actually blending these things and showing how this works. So one thing that I want to do real fast that I forgot to do is we need to convert our height map into a parameter as well. So we'll call this M1 height. And we'll go ahead and just associate this with the M1 inputs, just so it's exposed, and that way we can change it. So if you remember in this setup that I had mentioned that the transition phase is where the two materials blend together. So in this case, we're using the red channel of our vertex colors. So I'll show you how this works here. So you can select your objects, and then what we want to do is go up to this paint. One of the cool things to mention about this setup is that you can, if you want to, on your meshes, you can actually paint these vertices in, say, Maya or Max. You can actually apply color to those in your DCC program and import it, and it will inherit those changes. But what's cool about this is that you can actually adjust those vertice colors in the editor and override what you imported, which is awesome. So. All right, so I'm going to select both of these, which means I can paint on both of them at the same time. If I only had one selected, you'll notice I can just only paint on that. So holding down Shift, I select both of them. You can select both of them in the outliner as well. And then we need to go to our vertice colors. Okay, so this is there's a couple things that that need to be mentioned here real quick to understand what's happening. So the things you want to control are your strength. You can do fall off as well, but 0.1 to 0.5 is actually an ideal range. Additionally, we can view where we've painted things. This is great for debugging to find out if a material is being applied or if you have vertice colors. So if we go through our RGB channels, right now everything is filled. So we go alpha is filled, red channel's there, green channel, there's nothing blue channel. So if I go off, and then what we can do, so right now there's no vertice colors. If we did have some vertex colors, we would have this option to remove. So let's go ahead and just remove everything so we know we're starting from blank. And then this is where to make note of how to use the tool. So because of our blending method, as you mentioned, and a little bit later we'll go into a more complex setup, but in this situation, we're using our red vertice colors to blend the two, and later we'll show how to use green and blue for some variations. So we really only need to have our red channel affected. So I can just uncheck my green and my blue, so I'm just painting in my red vertice colors. And then we've got our paint color and erase color, which is fine because we're essentially using it as a mask. In your viewport, when you're painting, if you press the X key, it will swap back and forth. So you can go white, you can go black. Very, very handy. Or you can hit this guy, but the X key works just as well. So, okay, so if we start painting in black, we can start seeing we're getting that blending effect that we wanted, which is awesome. So we can go in here, we can paint what we need to, and then if we need to erase, we'll just go back to white. And I'll show you here too, again, where 0.5 is very potent when painting. If I go 0.1, you can see I can kind of start feathering it a little bit more, which is cool. So that is ultimately the effect that we're going for, is exposing some of these guys. Now, I'm going to jump over real fast, click this guy. We'll go back and we'll actually select our material instance that's being applied. And then I'll show you some of these parameters. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to take note of some of these regions that look a little bit more feathered. That is this height blend contrast. So if I take this up, you can see we get a much sharper blending between those two. And again, this is great. This is part of our material instance, so we can do this on the fly as opposed to having to go back to the actual master material itself and change it. So I'll take this up to probably about 0.5. I think that looks good. And then, of course, with this, because of our tiling, we can at any point go back in here as well and let's say we take this up to, let's say 4, you can see that it still applies the tiles where our vertex colors are painted. It doesn't change that, which is awesome. And again, this happens per instance in your level. So, you know, I could take these guys and I could duplicate them out. In fact, actually, let's do that real fast. I'll show you. So I'm just going to hold down Alt, duplicate these guys, and then I will select them, that joint, and then I'm going to go back to my vertex colors, remove it so it's all flat. I'm going to select my other two, and so you can see here as I paint that I can get this variation. Let's take this back up to 0.5 just so it's a little bit more. But I can do these really cool blends across multiple meshes. Now, let me fix this up too, so we don't have that Z fighting that's happening there. All right, there we go. So now I think that this is probably more evident about the power of using this layered material setup, in that, you know, you can have these repeatable textures that keep a light footprint in your video memory. But, you know, if you have a massive long wall that you need this kind of variation, you really can't do that with a specialized texture. This is really, in my opinion, really the only and best approach to be able to get those variations so you don't see repetition in anything. So I absolutely love this, and it's extremely lightweight. So that covers the basics of creating this setup. We just go over this real fast. Again, I'm going to pull up this master material that we created. So just to explain, so all of this is just our UV tiling. Nothing fancy there. You don't even have to have that in there if you don't want to. And then we've simply taken our input mats, exposed them as parameters, so now we can control them over here, and then broken them out just for clarity. But you know, we could pull directly from here. That's totally fine too. And then we've gone in and we've blended. So our A channel is going to be our material 1. B channel is going to be our material 2. Transition phase, again, is how we're blending this, is our red vertice colors. And then our height texture is what we plug in. Again, this needs to be your base, so it needs to be your material 1. And then contrast is simply a parameter that we created that allows us to change on our material instances. Duplicate that whole process for each base color, metallic, roughness, normal, AO, whatever channels you're using. Plug those into our make material attributes, and then on our output, again, we have use material attributes checked. We simply plug it in, and that is it. And then inside of our inside of the editor, we can simply go to our paint under our vertices, and then using black and white values painted in our red, we can do the transitions and everything, and that's it. So awesome setup. I think I absolutely love this workflow. So that covers the basics of this setup. And in the next video, I'm actually going to show you a little bit more complex setup with that master material that will give us 2 additional variations at relatively no cost, because we're not increasing our texture count. We're simply just adding some more parameters for more variations. So we'll jump to that guy.